Hello, everybody. Welcome to day 3 of vETC at NAB 2023. I've got a wonderful group of folks here. I like to nickname them the Gaijin Collective. We don't have everybody in the group here today, but we do have some of the people that are absolutely amazing. So I'm going to hand the mic off to you to introduce yourselves.
Hello, I'm AJ Wedding. I'm the co-founder of Orbital Virtual Studios. I've been in the business 20 years in production. You can tell by the gray hair, and visual effects as well. And that's what kind of got me into all of this stuff.
And I'm JT Rooney. I'm with XR Studios. I come from a more live entertainment background and now have a facility in Hollywood with 2 LED stages on it. So part of the overall group here. If you want to tee it off a bit, but yeah.
So I guess kind of what I brought you here together is because I hear that you guys actually share notes or help each other or talk about projects. And I think that that's a really exciting and interesting way to go as opposed to seeing everybody as a competitor. And so I'll let you speak to some of those things.
I mean, maybe to start a little bit on it, it's been a journey for everyone in the virtual production space, everyone who has a screen or saw a certain TV show or film that got them into this, and learning that journey has been different for everyone. And I think at the beginning, everyone was maybe a little bit closed off because everyone was, oh my gosh, A, trying to survive COVID or other stuff like that, and B, trying to get into a new industry is always tricky. And over time, the industry is growing into a real industry, and with that comes relationships and friendships and competition and collaboration. And so I think there's been a real just natural flow in the last year or so of people starting to say like, hey, what are you doing on the other side of town? Or what are you doing in another region? Or what are you doing here? Because I think one thing to base this whole conversation on is that the group that we're talking about, or the sort of conversations are about running an actual stage. Because there's a real difference of popping up a wall, and making something work versus day in, day out, making a business based off of a location. And I think that's been kind of the core of all of this, and maybe that's how we all kind of started.
Yeah, I think one of the things we have to keep a real close eye on is this industry as a whole, and we have to make sure that people continue to get better at it. Every stage makes it more photoreal, makes it more, and how are we running our businesses? Like what's making us money, and kind of helping to figure out how to stay alive, right? And I think part of that is going to be helping us to keep the industry going, because if people stop using virtual production because they had a bad experience, well, then we're all screwed. So what's the point?
I think that's been a real thing, is like we were talking earlier, it's like when people first got into this business, or even in the last couple of years, it's been, hey, do you have the shiny toy? Do you have the tech? And now it's finally growing into a place where it's maturing as an industry. And so it's more about what you do with it rather than it existing in the first place. And I think that's what's really interesting for everyone, is like our perspective coming from the live world a bit. We did this Katy Perry video 3 years ago that still gets talked about, and it's only good or still is talked about because it was serving an actual purpose. You wanted to be inside a cartoon world, like this was the best solution to do it. There wasn't another really good option. And so when things like that are done in a way that actually makes sense for it, Mandalorian included, like this actually helped with a certain problem, like that's why things stick. So now it's becoming an industry. We're trying to make sure that people are using it in the right way and comparing notes back and forth when we can, because that's the only way we'll grow a bit. I don't know if you had a thought on that, but.
So I think that's an important distinction. What I'm finding as a major trend is that stages are specialized towards what they need to do. Cinematic is very different than broadcast, which is different than XR, AR, which is different than theater performances or whatnot. Can you kind of elaborate on how you guys are seeing some of those things change?
I mean, I would love for us to land on actual terms that we're all going to agree
on.
Yeah,
100%. I mean, that's the hardest part with all of this. Like, what even is any of this? But yeah.
Yeah, I would say to kind of give an example of how we differ, it's like we're both in Los Angeles, but whenever somebody comes to me and says they want XR, I send them to you because I'm not even going to mess with that. It's a whole separate thing, even though we all have LED walls and tracking solutions. It's a very different system, and it's not one that is easy to build. And
yeah, and I think what we're realizing is that different people in this industry, like you said, each stage has their own thing, which is the same thing as any business. Like you have your own flavor of stuff, and so when an industry matures, the people who are really good at a specific thing excel in that, and other people know when to say, like my stage can fit in a Ford F-150. That's the largest car we can get. So if I have a semi-truck coming in, I need to call someone else who has the space for it and help that client get to a place where it's, going to be taken care of. Because anyone who does a project in a poor way is really bad for the whole industry. So I think it's, when you have camera shops or other rental places or whatever, everyone kind of finds their different strengths and weaknesses. And if someone asks for a 35 mil camera at a normal shot, they're like, oh, I don't know, but these guys have the thing. And so I think it's just getting to that point of maturity, which has been really helpful. But I think more importantly, it's been talking with everyone about, at events like this and throughout the year, of what is the industry? Because it is becoming an industry versus just a one-off sort of trick. And so how do you deal with clients? How do you deal with education? How does it grow, and how can we deal with new talent and all that sort of stuff like that? So rambling a bit,
yeah,
but
it's nice to know
there.
We're not alone. We can really talk about the problems that we see. I think that's really what we're doing.
Yeah, and I actually like how you reached out to that partnership, and people like Felix too. I mean, even beyond just the stages, so that's kind of cool there.
I think that's been a big thing, is on the development side or what services people are doing. It's more to make a studio or a stage work, there's way more gear and equipment than here right now that all has to work. You're all relying on vendors and partners and stuff like that. So that's been a big thing, is that it's a whole industry based off of partnerships.
Absolutely. And that was kind of the thing. The reason why we partnered with Narwhal and Felix was, we just try to identify the problems that we're seeing and see if we can fix them. Our whole focus has always been filmmakers first, and, how do we make this system better for filmmakers, make it so they can walk in the stage and do what they do without having to change how they do things. And so one of the big parts that was a problem is the pipeline, right? And so that's why Felix and I have been working on a new pipeline that we're presenting to the studios to basically be like, look, it can be done like this if you want. And it's going to be a lot more collaborative.
I think that's the thing, is the pipeline, actually back to the definition of virtual production in camera VFX, LED volume, I don't even know what to call it some days, but if you talk about virtual production, you're using one name to describe a workflow across 10 different industries, like you were saying. So someone's definition, it's the same with normal production, a normal single camera shoot from inside someone's basement in Cleveland, Ohio, compared to what happens on a Hollywood set. That's still production, but there's a million different ways to talk about it. So it's really confusing when we say virtual production, because you're trying to apply one set of rules across multiple different industries and verticals and workflows and all sorts of stuff like that. So finding ways to standardize pipelines has been really helpful, so that people can at least have something to hang on to of I know the word VAD, that means, okay, I can latch on to that and hold on for dear life, and that's been really helpful to see stuff like that start to standardize a bit more, which is really good.
So I'm going to do a little bit of a shift. What's exciting you guys coming up? As you come to this show and look at 2023 and the rest of the year, besides me stealing your Minky lights, what are you interested in?
I mean, the lighting stuff is funny, but the mimics are amazing if you want to go check them out at their booth, what KinoFlow is doing. But there's actually a lot of people doing image-based lighting at the show today, which is great. And I think that it's filling this gap that was needed, which is very, very digital thing going on over there, but not really thinking about how human faces were looking. And so that's a solution to help make sure we're using actual proper color science to really talk about, production, what looks good, and making sure that it stands up and it is sustainable for time. So that's been exciting. I heard Sam Nicholson say the word Nerf, which I was just like, that's awesome that Sam's talking about Nerfs. Those have been amazing. Everyone's really talking about that a lot. How we acquire assets to be on the screen has changed so much in the last year, and it's going to continue changing with AI and all sorts of other stuff, but it's all happening at the exact same time, and that's the crazy part, is we feel like we're on the crazy train every day where there's a new thing. We're excited about it, but it's a little bit crazy, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, everything you said, yes. I think one of the big things for us is every time one of these new things pops up, we have to play with it and understand it, because we have to be able to tell people how to apply it. And so, we just did a project in our stage with something called digital prosthetics, which is basically a live deep fake. It's somewhat controversial, but also very helpful in certain circumstances. I mean, if you're going to do an alien makeup, which would require 9 hours sitting in a chair, or the actor can just walk on stage and perform and can actually
One
see
of
their
these is
performance.
better.
Yeah.
I think though that, like you said, though, part of it is that there's new tech. It's very rare in an industry where there's something new that's been developed the week before and you're using it in a professional environment for a paid thing. And that's been the entire experience for the last 4 years nonstop. And that is like every single vendor and every single piece of equipment we have in the studio is on a beta or alpha version of something, firmware or software. And that is a really hard way to live your life because things go wrong. But you need that sort of edge to keep up because this technology is pulling everyone in a different direction. Like we were talking about the image-based lighting, but even normal lights for the last couple of years. We use moving headlights in our studio, but we replaced the light engine inside of it to have a better understanding of what the color white was. And so everyone in the room, from radios and comms companies to prop manufacturers to camera support, like it's touching every department in a really crazy way. So it's what makes it a wild ride.
Yeah, I heard a lot of people talking about faking it till you're making it, or do you feel like you're not qualified? To some of the people, but you have to learn on the job, real time. I mean, you got to figure these things out. You can't just immediately be an expert at, be a Tim Kang who's dedicated half of his life to understanding the science, or a Richie. He's doing some hardcore math on these LED panels.
Yeah, for sure.
That's not my space. I mean, knowing that math is not my space, but
I think that if anyone says that they're an expert in this, they're probably like halfway not, being fully truthful there. Like it is, you can be an expert in one part of it, but the overall lift of it is so large that, yeah, you have to be a technologist and you have to grow. And that's been why it's hard for adoption for a lot of people, is because you're asking producers or clients or creatives to join you on a technology-based journey. And so a lot of the time we spend is to like hide all of that behind a curtain, and then they just get to talk about their favorite colors, and like that's fine. But you still have to like walk through it with everyone, and it's just challenging. So that's why it's nice to be able to talk to other people about it.
Yeah, I'm sure you hear this a lot too, but one of the questions we get like almost every day is, this sounds like a dumb question, probably. They always start with that. This probably sounds like a dumb question. And because they think that, we are experts. We know a lot because we've been doing it for a while, but there's no such thing as an expert in this field. It's constantly changing.
Touching it's so important.
Yeah,
and you have to soak in it a bit too. And this is what's interesting as well. It's a good industry point I was talking about with Shelley Sable from Fuse and Ian Messina, who's on the East Coast, is doing awesome stuff with Nerfs right now. But what's interesting is as an industry grows and a studio is built to service the stuff, that studio then needs to work to pay for itself. And also, if things go well, it's working because it's busy. But then how do you keep the growth and the sort of appetite for learning when you're running and executing a stage? And so Fuse has done a nice thing in New York where their 42nd Street stage is kind of an R&D lab. I mean, it's doing productions, doing stuff as well, but they're really dedicating to like breaking stuff there. And that's hard for people to do. That costs money, that takes time, it takes effort and talent, but that is the only way this industry has grown so quickly in the last 3 years, is because it's been constant innovation. But now that it's working, everyone's busy, and so the innovation has to keep up in the right way. And so there's a weird math problem there to solve that I'm not sure anyone's quite totally sorted that yet. Yeah,
I mean, to that point, like whenever you get somebody who's really excited about it and maybe can't afford it, if their passion is there, we do our best to try to make it work, because I want them to succeed, because those are the people that are going to drive this stuff forward in the future. So we'll always try to make that work money-wise, if we can.
I think that's been a big thing that everyone's kind of been getting into, is the business aspect of this, not to get into too much financials, but the business aspect of it is interesting because you have an adoption rate that you have to figure out, and you have an execution side that you have to figure out, and you set precedents, and then precedents are hard to break once you set them, so it is quite tricky. But Tim and the guys at View, who isn't here at the moment, like they've done a great job with scaling in a way that people have not yet quite hit yet. And there's challenges with that, I'm sure, but now they've built a bunch of tools on the cloud that they released yesterday to help the problems of scaling. And it's just, so I think one thing kind of feeds the other, and we'll see where it lands.
So any other things you'd like to talk about while we're up here?
I mean, I think for me, like one thing that the group has been really interesting about are just the general conversation points of people getting together and talking, is that we're also talking a lot in different markets in different countries. So comparing our state of work in Los Angeles is a pretty specific view set on the world. You know, not everywhere is like Hollywood or downtown or LA in general, but speaking with people in Seattle or New York or Paris or London, or there's great studios in Mexico City. There's obviously a very small stage that just opened in Australia. So there's a lot of stuff all over the world right now, and it's like seeing how everyone is working is really interesting, because that is how, you know, sort of industries evolve. So that's been fun for me, and I've been on a sort of like a peace tour of stages in the last year. I visited about 28 stages, I think, in the last year, and it's been really interesting to see how people are doing stuff, and even just like layout designs. You've been really cool with having different LED layouts and names for them, which I love. I think it's so smart because it just helps take the abstraction out of it, and like that is something that people will see that and you learn it and say, oh, you might not copy it, but it will make your brain think to go to somewhere you haven't gone before, which I think is interesting.
Yeah, I think the thing that people are starting to realize now is that there's not one answer. You know, it may be the answer that fits the production is really what matters. And so different shapes, you know, that kind of stuff, different panels, different equipment altogether. I mean, that's, you know, the best panel for your LED stage is the one you can afford, that can get there on time, you know. And every panel manufacturer is making them better and better. So eventually, you know, they're all going to be really up to snuff. So.
That was something Sam was just talking about in his panel, that like there are, you know, LED manufacturers making sub 1 mil panels, or like Sony's Crystal Tile and all sorts of stuff. And it really, again, it just depends on what you're trying to do. And I do think that's been something as a studio owner and like everyone who's in this side on actually running a space, is that there is a big shift, and there is a lot of conversations about, should you have a permanent built space or should it be per project? And we live in a lot more short form media with my studio. So it's more entertainment based or broadcast or commercial music video, you know, 1 to 3 day shoots or 5 day shoots versus a big 12-week sit down. And for me, I think if you're doing a film that's for 12 weeks, I think you should build a custom thing for it, because you have a spaceship that you're working around, or a giant water tank, or, you know, who knows what. And I think that's been a big shift, that looking what's happening across the industry, there are some changes on that side. But I think for us, having a permanent space where people don't have to worry about Genlock and don't hear that word, or don't hear about all the hard stuff, like I think that matters to have market adoption.
Yeah, you bring up a good point, because when we started building Orbital Studios, we had this plan for these 2 stages. So the one that's kind of the smaller commercial stage, and then one's like the Mandalorian size kind of big stage. And about halfway through building the big stage, we tore it down, because we realized there were 2 clients for that, and they already had stages.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, they're
So,
good.
yeah, so we turned that stage into more of a flexible thing, where basically you can put up the walls however you want, and you know, we got a panel that you can put up very fast. So, you know, right now I think we have a 20 by 60 flat wall in there, and the 10 by 20 that rolls. So it really just comes down to what's best for the production.
I think the original idea for XR, with like the disguised version of XR, which has a floor and set extension, all stuff like that, the original idea for that in 2017 was to have a little cube that was the size of the stage, and then you could just, you know, scale infinitely, it'd be perfect. And then after doing it for like a week, we're like, oh, people walk, and they move their hands sometimes, and like, you know, like the holodeck only works for some of this. So our stage is 70 feet wide, even if we have 1 person on it, because there's lighting and shadows and just stuff to think about. So I think just over time, everyone's learned and changed and grown, and in 3 years, we've done, I think, probably 10 or 11 different LED configurations. And each time it's changing and growing, and you know, that's just what it will take. But like you said, it's just depends on the project and depends on the needs.
And I do want to give a shout out to some of the innovation I've seen at your stages, like the way you're pushing the boundaries there at Orbital on what can be shot, how it can be shot, coming against this notion of it has to be a Mandalorian size stage, getting in closer. That's fantastic. Your 4 frustrums, holy crap, that's so cool. If you go out there and you check that out. So both of you guys are really kind of pushing the boundaries, and I don't know if you want to talk a little more about any of these things, but I really think that's fantastic.
Yeah, I mean, that we definitely, to do live stuff, you have to have a lot of toys, and there's just a lot of stuff involved. And so, you know, in order to achieve a crossfade, you know, on a broadcast thing, to fade between 2 frustrums, we had to go down this whole path with the guys at Megapixel and Ghost Frame and Row, and we went through three years of work just so we could do a star wipe, basically. And it's pretty crazy that you have to do that, but now that it's up and going, it's creating all sorts of new solutions for all sorts of people. And the Fox Sports stage is doing NFL football with NAP Sweetwater. They're doing 4 Sims. They're doing great stuff with that. So the Ghost Stream stuff is definitely great. If you haven't seen it on Roasting, you should check it out because it's a magic trick, you know, and it's very fun to have magic tricks in this world. But the rest of it is like, yeah, we've always been a technology-focused company, and so we want to keep growing, and I think that has to be part of the ethos of it. Otherwise, it doesn't really work. You know, I have to be pushing to the next thing because this all got really big before it was ready, probably, and so it's still not fully ready, but it's still growing, which is what makes it fun.
Yeah, I think we talk about education being kind of the biggest barrier to all this stuff. And for me, I've noticed the thing we fight against most is misinformation. So whenever I hear something from someone that can't be done, it's the first thing we go do, because we want to make sure that they're right or they're wrong. You know, and I think we've disproven. You know, I think we're about to launch all these myths that we've busted, basically, in virtual production, and it's always going to be our goal, because if you say it can't be done,
Mythbusters.
Yeah, there you go.
Someone made a show.
Maybe
called
we can sell that,
Mythbusters,
can we?
Yeah.
We'll go back and forth between our stages, and we'll both make money.
Perfect. That's good though, and I think that's part of it is like when people have. There's been a lot of times where people walk into a stage and it's like, oh, it's on another facility, and I heard that you can't do this thing, so we made our whole creative for the shoot to do this, and it was like, oh no, we can just push this button. But then there's other times where someone asks us something, I'm like, I have no idea what you're talking about. Like, please tell me about this, because someone just made up something else that you guys did or whoever. And I think that's the wild ride of it, is like you can think you know a lot, and then someone completely blindside you with something, which is exciting.
So I did want to give a shout out to Isaac Campos here in the audience. He was one of the early stages, and just really appreciate your support of the industry as well. I am going to open this up to questions now at this point, see if anybody has any questions for the people here.
You were just talking about education and also before about R&D. I work for a university and run a stage for a university in Australia. I see our role as part of this, and to be that space for R&D, to take on things that can't be for commercial clients. Do you think that's where this needs to go, back towards colleges and universities and places like that?
I think for me, just to go first, is I've been really, really invested in the university and training side of things. I think it's really important. We've done co-ops and internship programs with about 4 different universities now, and part of it, one of the first ones we did was with a really small school in Ohio called Miami University, Ohio, in Oxford, and we gave them 4 problems that we knew needed to be solved that were like, I don't even know where to start on this. And a bunch of 19-year-olds made a really elegant solution that then we worked with Disguise and other people, and now are part of that whole pipeline. And it's like there's something magical about having space in a university environment that could really help push this. Jake Pinholster and the team at ASU are doing really awesome stuff there. University of Michigan's been pushing it. So I think it is definitely a huge need, and that is where it will stabilize and grow in a healthy way. The only thing about universities that's a little tricky is that, like we've been talking about, the technology is changing so fast. Like, how do you build curriculum for that? How do you even say, like, get this textbook, because the software that you're talking about won't even exist by the time they get there. So hopefully it's about teaching people how to learn or how to be hungry. And then it's exciting, I think. But yeah, I think that's really great.
So there's another guy named Eric Wolf, and he recommends that you're targeting 80 days a year for commercial work, and then you have to be giving away another 20 plus days a year to partnerships, especially with universities. If it's either fostering talent or your pipeline of people that are helping operate, run, back up the stage, do VAD work, anything else, or other reasons, you know, you like he said throughout the whole thing, there's new things constantly coming, and you got to touch those things. So I'm also working with a group of people that are trying to define some of this core curriculum. You know, what does Operator 1 mean? And I'm not going to tell you how to teach a class, but I'm going to say that me, Unreal, Alex Machina, one of these other guys are all signing off saying it does have just these subpoints. You need to know this aspect. You need to know that aspect. All these just key points. So we are working on things like that from a high level, just so that they know that people are coming out of some of these curriculums, at least have the fundamentals.
Yeah, I think all of us who have had stages or do virtual production. I'll try that one. Yeah, all of us who've done virtual production, who have stages or companies, everyone has a training program because they know how important it is for people to learn this stuff. Certainly at the college level, I teach a class for my alma mater, Western Michigan University.
Midwest,
Yeah, right. And then, and of course, with our partnership with Narwhal Studios, their main focus now is going to be toward education. And so all of the sort of VAD work and whatnot is actually going to be funneled through Orbital Studios. So us being able to kind of take that on helps them really push out these university-based programs as well, which they've sold into different universities.
And I think that brings up another point to speak for Shelley, who's Shelley Sable from Fuse is someone who's part of this group and talks all the time, and she always brings up a really nice point in that up until now, a lot of the stages have been holding the weight of training and education, which is fine, we're all willing to do it, but there's a real financial and headspace perspective to think about that, where we are taking the time to educate 300 producers in one sitting and then a bunch of new people, and that's great, but we have businesses to run, and it's a big risk to do that. So, but we have to do it to get the industry going. So if an educational society or group or university can take on some of that, it's a much more appropriate use so we can help pay the bills, basically.
And time testing the team. So I got to work with Isaac on Ripple Effect, which was great, getting to use his stage, but Amazon Studios lent me their whole stage for a month because they didn't want to open it up to, brand new high-end multi-million-dollar production. They wanted to just make sure that they understood where some of these subtle bumps were, that until you're actually working on major productions, you're not going to spot. So do we have time for one more question? Nope? All right, well, thank you guys so much. I really appreciate it, and I hope you don't mind the nickname I've given you.
Yeah, thanks for that, yeah. Thanks, everyone.